Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't.
Vaping, it seems to be everywhere these days. Sure, adults engage in this addictive behavior, but sadly so do adolescents and even young children in very high numbers. There have been all kinds of myths as they relate to vaping, and as always, it's crucial to listen to experts who know the science. One such person is Dr. Adam Leventhal. Adam is a professor at Keck School of Medicine at USC, where he serves as professor of population and public health sciences, as well as the director of the Institute for Addiction Science. As his titles suggest, he's the guy from whom I would want to learn, and I'm so grateful he shared his knowledge on this episode. So listen in as Adam and Adam talk about vaping, the myths, and the realities. Dr. Adam Leventhal, who has asked me to call him Adam, a hearty welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Oh man, so much so. When I heard about your work and addressing this dire need to explore the science of vaping, both as a microcosm as well as a macrocosm in terms of the public health issues, you're all up in it. And it's everywhere. I remember when they first came out and some of the ways it was really pitched to me by various users of said vape was, oh, this is a great healthy alternative. And lo and behold, we found out not so much. First off, let's get all up into nicotine. Why is it so addictive? You also talk about the fact that in some cases it can be hard to induce addiction with nicotine, and there are places in which it's very easy.
No, absolutely. So yeah, nicotine is a fascinating drug. So I was a childhood cigarette smoker. Yep. And so in the 90s, when I was a teenager, that's when adolescent smoking peaked. And there's a lot of marketing promotion that really brought in that generation. What's really interesting about nicotine, as you alluded to, is that when you first try nicotine, yes, it'll give you a buzz, sometimes a little too much of a buzz and makes you nauseous. But once you become a regular nicotine user, a smoker, or someone who vapes, it really doesn't give you that much of a high. This is not like cocaine, right? Where anytime people take cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, they feel euphoric. So nicotine is an interesting drug in the sense that, yes, nicotine drives the addiction, but it's the combination of the nicotine hit plus the sensory experience of inhaling the smoke or the vape, the smells, the taste, the ritual, and those two things synergize. And that's what makes nicotine addictive. So the commercial cigarette and now the commercial e-cigarette, especially because they deliver it through your lungs and hit your brain so fast, plus the sensations, that's what makes nicotine addictive. And that's why these two products are addictive in comparison to, let's say, when someone tries to quit, they're going to use the nicotine patch, which there's no sensations. The nicotine transdermal patch, you put it on, the nicotine slowly gets in your blood, and that's it. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Totally. And you compare and contrast three different elements. You compare cigarettes to vaping to air.
All right.
And I was wondering if you could talk about this triad of these three things that we may breathe in, depending on what we're up to.
Yeah. E-cigarettes, when they came on the market in 2009 to the United States, very early, they were developed as a product that could be used for people who smoke and they want to switch and potentially quit smoking and maybe use this alternate form of nicotine delivery. But what happened is over time in a lightly regulated market, the products changed and became more and more characteristic of something that children would like, with bubblegum flavors, interesting social media marketing, and whatnot. So the reason I'm kind of saying this is the original idea, can we come up with something that's less harmful than cigarette smoke, but that would give you the same sort of nicotine hit and the kind of sensation, the user experience? I think e-cigarettes achieve that in the sense that we know that e-cigarette aerosol, what people call vapor, but it's actually aerosol, it's not as harmful as smoke from a cigarette.
The pulmonological considerations are not as severe.
Right, exactly. It's just less toxins in it. And because you're not actually combusting anything, you're not lighting something on fire, which is what you do with a cigarette. You're literally lighting a plant on fire. And when you light something on fire and you raise it up to that level of heat, then you get all sorts of chemical reactions and carcinogens and whatnot. But to say something is less harmful than cigarettes, that's a very low bar. Right? One of the most deadly consumer products ever created. Now, at the same time, they're not without harm, these e-cigarettes. And for a child, it can be harmful, just not as harmful.
So, Adam, as I understand it, it's kind of like saying that, I don't know, chewing tobacco is okay because it's less harmful than cigarettes, when we know that chewing tobacco does have some pretty bad health outcomes.
Sure. But the public health message, right, is that if you're someone who smokes cigarettes and you've tried everything to try to quit, and you can't see a life without inhaling nicotine on a daily basis, then e-cigarettes would be the lesser of two evils for sure. And that would be great. Now, on the other hand, if you don't use nicotine, don't start vaping, no matter what age you're at.
What happens over time to someone who engages in that slippery slope? Their friends are doing it. You mentioned the fact that mint is particularly attractive, as are other flavors like bubblegum. I've smelled them. They smell great. It's just that what can happen over time to someone who is a chronic vapor, who does it over a sustained amount of time?
Well, we know there's going to be certain health effects that we are fairly certain about, right? Now, the qualifier is they've only been on the market for about 15 years in the United States. And really, people haven't really been using them. Maybe it's been about a decade. So because of that, we don't have long-term follow-up studies. So we can't rule out the possibility that once you hit 20 years of vaping or 30 years of vaping, there could be some health effects that we just don't even know. So putting that aside, what we do know is that for that person who becomes regular vapor, addiction is very likely. And what happens is when you inhale nicotine, the brain changes and it adapts and it habituates. And it tries to maintain homeostasis by changing the amount and the type of nicotine receptors in the brain. And then what happens is when you stop vaping, you get nicotine withdrawal symptoms. Not everybody, right? But it's fairly common. Anxiety, irritability, difficulty in terms of regulating appetite. So you might gain weight, and craving, which can make it really difficult to concentrate if you're trying to work or you're a kid who's going to school and you can't stop thinking about vaping and how you're going to get out of a meeting or a class to go vape. So that's the number one effect. I think other things that we are concerned about, especially for teens and young adults where the brain is still developing, is the proper development of the brain pathways that regulate mood or attention. And so the evidence suggests that there might be a small potential increase in risk of things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or depressive symptoms. Not saying like everybody who vapes gets that, but it's just your chances may be higher. So those are the two, in addition to the lung effects. And if you have asthma and you start vaping, it doesn't help your asthma. We know that. That's fairly strong evidence.
And it would be fair to say it makes it far worse. I can only imagine that the pulmonary experience of somebody who has already compromised lungs, ingesting a freaking aerosol, which just intuitively sounds all bad. But is that correct? Is that the aerosol component?
Yeah.
Some other deleterious
No,
aspects.
that's right. I mean, because it's just chemicals, right? And so it's nicotine, some other chemical called propylene glycol, which isn't really that harmful to eat. It's in Twinkies, right? Or vegetable glycerin. But to inhale it on a regular basis, we don't know what the effects might be and the flavorings. And so with vapes, there's still a heating element. It's just not going to get as hot as cigarettes, but it's going to get pretty hot. And so you're inhaling hot mixture of chemicals that have been heated.
So when you're describing the nicotine receptors in our brain that change because they're used to a particular quota, and
Very good.
it's almost like our brain becomes Cookie Monster for nicotine. It's like, feed me, almost Little Shop of Horrors, feed me, the plant. And there are a host of side effects, as you mentioned, the irritability, the need to keep feeding it, weight gain if we try to reduce it, and obviously a whole host of other pieces of really negative feedback come our way saying, actually, probably better to maintain it, is the messaging we get in our bodies, even though it's not so.
Yeah, no, that's well said, right? And so what it does is it triggers a primitive instinct that says, oh, I really need this to feel better. Even though logically, if someone's trying to quit, they may say, okay, don't do it. But it's hard because you have this primitive drive of wanting to get the nicotine back into the system. And so that can be powerful for some people. And that's what makes nicotine addictive. Now, one thing is, I should also say it goes away, right? And so once you stop, some people have the worst symptoms of withdrawal, maybe in the first 24 to 48 hours. And it can linger as much as 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. But the message that's important for people to know is that if you ride it out, it goes away. And it's possible that other types of nicotine medications, like we talked about the nicotine patch or a nicotine gum that's therapeutic, might help alleviate those symptoms and help you get through.
To wean off.
Yeah. And then the brain can get close to back to normal, especially if you're not a young person or you don't do it for a very long time.
Especially if you're not a young person.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
When you're in adolescence or you're a child, that's when you're developing all these brain pathways. And so when you take a psychoactive agent, nicotine's one, but we're learning more about cannabis and THC and, of course, alcohol. Your brain, where it's meant to develop in its kind of perfect potential state of fully operating in terms of thinking, reasoning, mood regulation, it's possible that the nicotine may stop your brain from getting to that potential. But I just want to say something. I don't want to scare everybody that some of these effects can be very subtle. And there's a lot of things that do affect brain development. Addictive drugs are one of them. Stress, of course, trauma, and other factors. So the effects could be potentially subtle, but who wants to take the chance? All things being equal, you have to take that choice between like, could there be a negative consequence, or do I want the fun of vaping and being with my friends or feeding the addiction?
Thinking about our neural development and how our prefrontal cortex, which is so important for planning and decision making and even suppressing our urges, is not fully online. And I was talking with my wife yesterday about just how non-future centric I was as a kid. And it was all about now. And there's something about vaping and selling cigarettes to kids who are only thinking about now. I just want to be cool with my homies. And one of the ways I do that is by joining them in vaping. I just want to be cool with the girls. And one of the ways that I do that is I say, hey, I'm a rebel. I vape. I might do really well in math. And you might think I'm a nerd, but I'm cool. I vape. So all they're thinking about is now. So there's something so nefarious about the notion of trying to peddle or market to adolescents because it's just a perfect storm. They're going to do it. They're going to take it. And you're saying that it will arrest their neural development, that this little bath that our brains are taking between our ears inside of all of the fluids and other environmental ideals that make brain development possible are profoundly lessened and may, I'm guessing, if they're not really happening during that sensitive period, I'm guessing they might not happen at all if it's overdone. Does that seem true?
Yeah, it's possible. So the science is advanced, but it's not so fully advanced that we can have some sort of definitive, based on all this data on brain scans, this is what happens. And because just life is life, right? And so there's a lot of things that affect our brain development. Sure. But I don't necessarily want people to be scared. But yeah, I think a good analogy is wet concrete. The wet concrete sets, it becomes fixed at some point, just like when your brain stops developing in your, let's say, early to mid 20s, sometimes late 20s. And while it's setting, if you throw maybe like a little bit of sand on there, the sand may stick. But over time, with all the wear and tear that happens to our brains, it may, in the end, be no different from the other piece of concrete. And it may function just as well. You can walk on the sidewalk, not going to trip. Or maybe it destabilizes it. I don't know. And then it's more likely to have a crack later. So that's the best analogy I think I have for it. Because, yeah, the brain doesn't really change that much as we age. And I should say in a positive way.
Absolutely. So it's that inconvenient answer of it depends and we don't really know. It depends on a whole host of factors. And you're also describing the resilience of our bodies. I remember when I was studying tobacco use, and one thing that was very heartening is that a smoker could, over time after quitting, have quite healthy lungs over time. Yeah. And it sounds like you're also suggesting that that might even be possible for a person who vapes.
Yeah, I think just the risk and consequences when you're young are potentially more. But you're right. That's a good message that when people smoke cigarettes and they're an adult, even if they're 50, 55, 60, and they've been smoking for 30, 40, 50 years, even then, when you quit, you start to see reduction in risk of death due to smoking, because we know cancer, heart attacks, and strokes, all these things, and a host of different things. So still, you start to see that benefit and the repair of lungs and other processes. So it's never too late to quit and get some benefit. Because sometimes people think that, like, yeah, well, I've been smoking for so long, might as well enjoy it. The damage is already done. The truth is that's not the case.
That's really heartening. And what we're talking about here is just risk management and stacking the cards in our favor. Mm-hmm. If somebody were to come to you and say, hey, listen, my 14-year-old son has started vaping. Unbeknownst to me, he's been vaping. This is, by the way, not the case. I have a 15-year-old son who does not vape. But if somebody did say, yeah, and he's been vaping for 2 years, what would be a reasonable plan to perhaps help that child get off the vape? Because the vape may be one of the few stabilizing pieces of their lives.
Yeah, you kind of implied a truth in that addictions, sometimes there is an underlying reason why people might be more at risk if they have an unstable life. Maybe they have depression, other kind of factors that can make it difficult to stop. A lot of times it is just young people. They just want to have fun. They don't know. Everybody wants to have meaning, pleasure, happiness. And sometimes those are hard to find in today's society, or we have high expectations. So I think that working with kids as a parent, being a little bit empathetic to that scenario, there's nothing wrong with you that you started vaping. It makes sense for all the various factors. And we talked about social reasons too, and peers. So trying to not have a punitive approach as a parent is important. And then a fair amount of teens want to quit too. So once you break that barrier and then you establish that relationship of a parent to kid, or maybe it's fine, and there's always a lot of honesty. Our data, because we as scientists, we survey lots of teens about how they feel about vaping, and a surprisingly high number say like that they want to quit or they tried to quit successfully. So when the teen is kind of in that space, then as a parent, if you have the resources, how do you connect them with a psychologist or a counselor? In the state of California, I think almost all states now, there's quit lines where you can call a counselor and they can help you quit for free.
Wow.
And you can get free nicotine medications like the skin patch in most states, sometimes based on like a subsidy. So there's a lot of options out there to try to help someone stop if they
So,
want to.
Adam, you just dropped so many things. First of all, it sounded like one of the things that a parent might want to do
Yeah.
is be empathic and find out what is it that it does for you. Tell me about your relationship with this thing. What are the feelings that you might not want to be feeling that the nicotine is helping you avoid and ameliorate? And I find myself wondering, if this were a game of Family Feud, what would the most common answer of why a teenager would want to quit?
I think probably they don't like feeling addicted, feeling like that they're tied to something that they don't have control over. So that lack of the agency, it can be very uncomfortable. Teens and adults, we want to be independent. And so that can be very jarring to feel like you're dependent on a drug. So I think that's kind of the main thing, the withdrawal. It's all part of it. But if you kind of ask them, they would say that. The most common reason why they start, I was curious. It's very innocent, simple, right?
Wow. I just took that in. I was curious. Of course. And it's almost how every fairy tale begins. Mom and dad say, don't do the thing. The kid does the thing. And often bad things begin to happen. But of course, by the end of the fairy tale, the kid somehow masters it. Not necessarily so with vaping, I'm guessing, but it's a similar, at least, beginning of the arc. And I was curious.
And that's the trait we want to foster. And most of us want to foster in our children. You should be curious. You should want to learn things, try things, and that can be challenging. And so that's why it is kind of a natural thing that people get caught up in with the best of intentions, I think.
Yeah. And so with regard to harm reduction and the nicotine patch or ingesting it in some way other than the vape, it sounds like tapering off is one of the best ways to help a person when they're engaging in vaping cessation.
And there are free phone apps that the government, the National Cancer Institute provides, I believe. And it's hard to know which is the best one, because if you went on the App Store, there'd probably be a bunch. But if it has a .gov, then you can at least feel some sort of security. That's what we see, is that young people, even older adults too, they like apps to help them quit. And I should say the nicotine patch and these types of the gum, if you're already regularly using nicotine, there's really negligible harm associated with it, right? So I would think of that as a medication that could potentially have some side effects, right? But not as a reduction of the harm. Unless you have an underlying cardiovascular disease, and then we say like you should stay away from all nicotine, it's very safe.
So the notion of harm reduction in this case is not on point, unless, of course,
Where the harm reduction comes in more is the people who are smoking, and then they still want to inhale nicotine and they want to switch to an e-cigarette.
Yeah, I remember nicotine was actually an ingredient in many of when I was living in Japan, in these Japanese energy drinks, often in there. Really interesting. Before we stop, are there any myths and realities that you might want to share with the listener?
Sure. Well, sometimes I get asked questions about lung disease in young people because it might have been like 2019. There was this outbreak, if you might remember, where people who were vaping were getting this rare type disease. A few people died and some people either have to go to the hospital. That was due to a select set of products that were marijuana vaping products because of a chemical that was added to them.
Right.
Called vitamin acetate. And so that has now been cleared of the market. A, it wasn't tied to nicotine vapes, and B, it was tied to marijuana vapes or cannabis, but it's been eradicated. So that's one thing, not to scare people. We don't see that type of a lung disease from an acute lung disease. So that's one myth.
That's a good one. Adam, wow. Thank you so much for sharing your hard-earned wisdom on vaping and various nicotine, as well as other forms of combustibles like tobacco. Your knowledge is incredible. You're doing good things for the planet. You're revealing some very inconvenient truths, but hopefully people see them as emancipating.
Well, great. Well, no, thank you. It's an honor and pleasure, Adam, to join this podcast and a great opportunity to help educate your listeners and your audience. So it was great.
Right on.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.